All team, give it everything you got!
It's time to fangirl flail with Fangirls Going Rogue.
Count me in.
Never get between a Mandalorian and a weapons package.
This is the way.
News, discussion, and commentary from the female point of view.
You call this a diplomatic solution?
No, I call it aggressive negotiations.
She's as important as he is.
With your hosts, Tricia Barr and Sarah Woloski.
Boy, am I glad to hear your voice.
Strap in, because this is where the fun begins.
I like the sound of that.
Welcome, Yub Cubs, to Fangirls Going Rogue. I'm one of your hosts, Tricia Barr from Fangirl Blog, and with me is my co-host, Sarah Woloski from Skywalking Through Neverland.
Hey, Tricia, what a crazy busy week this is. It's Halloween week for us. We've got amazing Star Wars content out as we're recording this today. It's October 26th, and we have a new episode of ANDOR. We have Tales of the Jedi. So just amazing Star Wars content coming out. And I don't know about you, but I'm like really excited.
So excited. You guys, this is an episode that you are going to want to listen to.
Yes. So we are going to focus today on Tales of the Jedi, which debuted, as I just said, on October 26th on Disney Plus. So if you weren't on Disney Plus this morning, I don't know who you are, because that's what I was doing. Now, this 6-part animated anthology series, it's the Star Wars series we really didn't know we needed. And each of these episodes, they come in at about 10 to 17 minutes. So they're considered shorts, but I don't know. I kind of call them tales. What do you call them?
They're little meaty morsels.
I like it. Okay. Well, so they explore Ahsoka Tano and Count Dooku during the prequel era. And what's interesting is both of these Jedi end up leaving the Jedi Order for different reasons. So we get to see little places in their lives where they, see certain things or make certain decisions, things like that. The series really explores those turning points in each of their lives. And yeah, so it's what we didn't know we needed, right? And so Tales of the Jedi, I think it's such a fascinating introduction, or a fascinating, what is that called? Genesis. It's a fascinating genesis. As we learned at Star Wars Celebration, when we went to the panel, Tales of the Jedi, with Dave Filoni, he mentioned that he created this series just by writing down some ideas he had. And then he brought these ideas to Athena Portillo, and she found the money and said, yeah, we need to make this stuff. And so and of course, when they made it amazingly. So we have returning Clone Wars and Rebels voice actors like Ashley Eckstein, Corey Burton, James Arnold Taylor, T.C. Carson, Ian McDiarmid, and Vanessa Marshall, and a surprise voice, Yaddle, right? Well, we'll talk about that. Yeah.
At the end? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about that after. Okay. And Kevin Kiner returns to compose the music. But now, the reason why Tricia and I are like so excited, and you can hear the excitement in our voices, is we have an interview we want to share with you. Let's roll it, Yub Cubs.
Yep. We learned at Star Wars Celebration that Dave Filoni wrote Tales of the Jedi on a whim and brought these parables to Athena Portillo, who then found the money to make this a reality. And Dave Filoni serves as a writer on 5 tales and supervising director on all.
Charles Murray and his daughter wrote the 6th tale, Choices, in which Count Dooku and Mace Windu run an errand for the Jedi Council, returning a slain Jedi Master's body to the Jedi Temple. But Dooku chooses to investigate her death. The corruption he finds spurs him on to choose a different path from the Jedi. This is such an intriguing tale, and to talk in depth about it, we have one of the writers, Charles Murray. Welcome.
Hello.
Not only the writer, but the director of this episode as well, right?
Yeah. With a lot of help for Saul Ruiz. Yes.
Wow, that's so inspiring. And Saul has worked on several of the Clone Wars and I believe Star Wars Rebels as well. And so have you, though.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. I did do both of them.
You had to like think about that.
Yeah. I think I did 2 episodes of Rebels.
That's right. I watched them both last night in prep for this. So, yep, Path of the Jedi and Rebel Resolve, which you co-wrote with Henry Gilroy.
Yes.
Yeah, 2 of my favorites. And for people who are Clone Wars fans, just so you have a familiarity with Charles's previous work, you wrote the arc where Ahsoka leaves the Jedi Order in season 5. And that was one of the most iconic arcs, I think, as a Star Wars fan. And then also you co-wrote the season 7 arc with the Martez sisters.
So basically you broke our hearts.
Yes. That was the directive. It wasn't just me. That's what I was told to do.
He got his marching orders.
Yeah. I like to call Ahsoka leaving the Hitchcock episodes because on a whim, I said to Dave and George, I'm gonna give each episode a Hitchcock spin. And they were like, okay, fine. And then when they came out, there was this sudden barrage of like questions of what does it have to do with Clone Wars? Why is he using these episodes with titles? And what's really going on underneath? And I was like, nothing. Like the man who knew too much became the Jedi who knew too much. And the funny thing is the first episode, Hitchcock has a movie called Sabotage. And I was like, okay, that's perfect. I don't have to change it at all, but there was another group of episodes, which I can't go into detail about, but what was going to be my crowning achievement was that it was going to be a spin on one of the original 3 Star Wars episodes titles, but it never came to fruition. So,
were we finally going to get a Revenge of the Jedi? Just kidding.
That would be fun. That's so like the Clone Wars, though, for people that have watched it, that you're going to spin off of some, iconic other story and get your, we had kind of the Wizard of Oz takes in the Clone Wars and all sorts of different homages to different things. So we kind of love that stuff.
I did too. But it caused a little ruckus because, which I wasn't expecting. I was like, oh, okay.
It's Star Wars. There'll always be a ruckus at some point. Can you tell us, because you've worked in TV, you have credits in Sons of Anarchy, the VTV series, Criminal Minds, and Castle, to name a few. What made you want to work on Star Wars?
It's a long story. Let me try to come up with the short version. Essentially, my oldest child was, when they were 6, was going through a crisis of identity. And we didn't see a lot of representation on TV at the time that my daughter could look at and see themselves. And I thought, that there were a couple of channels that were safe, and realized that those channels were just as egregious in the lack of identity. And so I kind of turned it into a game because they were 6 and their younger sister was 4. And so the thing became, we'll watch shows that we think will have someone who represents you on them. And we spent a lot of time watching shows with animals because we couldn't find any. And then I was coming home from work one day, and there was this big, wide-eyed smile waiting for me at the door, and the statement issued was, "I found someone who looks like me." And I was like, "Okay, show me." And they ran to the DVR and hit rewind, and there was a commercial for the original Clone Wars movie. And when Ahsoka popped up, finger pointed and said, "Her." And I went, "Okay, so I guess we're going to the movies." And when the movie came out, we saw it twice. And then a couple of years later, we were still going through that process. And I came home again, and there was another big, wide-eyed, excitable person standing in the door saying, "She's coming to TV." And I went, "Who?" And Ahsoka. And so the show had just started, and I said, "She looks exactly like you." And so, here we go. Here you finally have someone who's, positive and has their own sense of self, and all of those other wonderful qualities that Ahsoka has. And maybe like by season 3, I happened to be in a writer's room with a guy who's now a very dear friend of mine, Cameron Litvak. And we were talking about Clone Wars, and he was a part of the writing room for season 4, but he wasn't going back. And I went, "I've never been able to work on anything that my kids could take part in." And I asked him if he would get in touch with whoever was in charge of hiring at the time, see if I could fill that slot. And it was Filoni and Christian Taylor. And he sent an amazing email representing our friendship. And they brought me in, and they hit me with the question, I guess they had been hitting all the other writers. So tell us why you're such a huge fan of Star Wars. And I went, "Actually, I'm an Indiana Jones guy." and you kind of saw the look on their faces. And then, but I told them this story about my oldest child. And they were like, "Come on now." Oh. And that's what that's what began my journey with Clone Wars.
I'm getting choked up because this is kind of what we talked about, was representation and how important it is. And you're literally like telling the story about how it affected you. And now I just feel all the love, extra love in those episodes of the Clone Wars that you were pouring into it, because it really meant something personally to your family. Oh my gosh. This is.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. You're talking about coming full circle, going in to the world because of my oldest child, and writing this episode with my youngest daughter it's kind of, and it's working on the show in and of itself has been one of my greatest accomplishments. I've been doing this for like 24 years now, and being in that room, being with Filoni and Christian, and eventually Cameron went back with me for what would have been season 7. I got Sons of Anarchy out of going into that writer's room, because Chris Collins was one of the writers, and Chris Collins was on Sons, and they were looking for writers to come onto the show. And he put me up for Sons because of my relationship with him on Clone Wars. So Clone Wars has kind of been my lucky charm.
All right. We like to hear it. Well, I think we're going to talk about Ahsoka some, but let's dive into the Tales of the Jedi, because this, for you, is an opportunity to grow into directing animation, Star Wars animation, beyond writing. And so we're kind of curious, how is that different for you to direct?
Well, I've directed a few movies, and I directed an episode of Sons of Anarchy. So the way they do their animation is kind of more in the previs filmic style than what most people know animation to be. And I used to just yell out outlandish things when I was in the room. We'd be talking about we'd come back from lunch and you would go through the main house and you'd go past like Indiana Jones's hat and the whip and Luke's lightsaber, and I would just point at something and go, George, can I have this? and he would just go, no. and then we keep going. And then one day, when I was talking to Dave, I was like, I want to direct an episode. And he was like, you know nothing about directing an episode. And I said, not until I do it. And he went, no. And then cut to all these years later, and we stayed in contact, before like the Disney Plus years. And, as you said, I wrote on Rebels and we've maintained a friendship. He's been very supportive of my indie filmmaking years. And he called me one day and he said, hey, so I'm doing these shorts and I think that would be the wheelhouse for you to actually get in and direct something. And I said, okay, cool. And he said, and I want you to write it too. Okay. And I said, I got an ask. And he said, what is it? And he's known my kids since 2009. So he's seen them, as a matter of fact, the season 4 premiere was at the Long Beach Aquarium, and they were handing out lightsabers for the kids. And so there's a picture of Dave, a woman dressed as Ahsoka, and my 2 kids holding lightsabers. And I just sent it to him a couple of weeks ago before the episode dropped. And I said, look, my youngest is into fan fiction. She's writing her own offshoot of Harry Potter. I know she's been writing short scripts. She was taking a film class in her senior year of high school. Well, she actually was going to college instead, and she went to junior college for her senior year instead of staying in school. And she was taking some film classes. And I said, what would you think about her co-writing it with me? And he was like, yeah, okay, cool. And I was like, that's what happens when you're friends with like really important people.
Yeah, no kidding.
They don't have to like get back to you. And so I sat her down and I said, what would you think about you and I writing something together? And she was like, And I said, what did you think about you and I writing a Star Wars short together? And she was like fan fiction? I was like, no, for Star Wars. And she was like, let me think. Yeah, okay. And I was like, that's the beauty of not being in touch with something bigger than you. And so for her, it was just like, I mean, I'll be writing it with my daddy. That was it. And so we started kicking the story around. And then there was a day when her mother called me and she said, it just dawned on her that she's actually doing this and she's a little nervous. And I said, nervous about what? And she was like, she's scared to work with you. And I was like, what? Wait a minute. And so we sat down and talked about it. And I said, what are you scared about? And she was like, I just think you won't like what I do. And you'll be, maybe you'll like be mean about it. And I was like, have I ever been mean about anything that you've tried to do creatively? And she's like, no. Have you ever seen me be mean to creative people while I'm working on stuff with them? And she's like, no. And I said, then where'd you get that from? She goes, I don't know. And I said, I'm not going to do it. And she goes, okay. And it was smooth sailing after that. And she was the one who came up with the angle of them going to retrieve the body of the Jedi.
Country. Right.
Yeah, and so I was like, all right. And so, we had a conversation with Dave and the super amazing Carrie Beck. And I want to say Athena was on the call. I'm not sure. But, Athena's super marvelous and wonderful herself. And we just kind of started shooting the story around. And then we got it to a place where they told us to go off and, pick at it and write it. And Élan did the first pass and I did a rewrite. And then she gave me notes on it. We kind of went back and forth. And then we gave it to Dave and Carrie and they gave us notes and we did them. And the next thing you know, we were kind of in the process. But the thing that Élan and I talked about was believing in something, two things. It was, how did Mace become a council member? And what do you do when something you believe in changes so drastically that you don't believe in it anymore? And so those were our two jumping off points. And so we kind of just batted it back and forth. And, Dave was like, it was Dave's idea to, bring Dooku into it and kind of make it this odd couple going.
They were
going on this mission. And so once Élan came up with Katri, it was like, okay, we can build a lot into this because we can talk about the different levels of society within a regime that some people see as fascist and some people see as holistic. And so we just kind of kept banging at it until we got a script that got approved.
Well, speaking of the odd couple, I love the line in the beginning when Mace and Dooku are talking and Dooku's like, your devotion to rules is both inspiring and maddening. So who came up with that line? And what are you most like? Do you follow rules like Mace or do you veer off on a different path like Dooku?
I'm not a Sith Lord, but if there's a rule to be broken, call me.
Nice. Okay. Now we know who we're dealing with.
Élan says that I came up with it because someone posted it today on Twitter that was the line was that you?
I don't think it was me, but I love that line.
Yeah,
there were a lot of people talking about it. It was a good line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody posted that line and I sent it to her because I thought she had come up with it. And she said, no, that's you. They made me do Mace's temp track.
Oh, wait, you mean his music?
Yeah, no. When
his dialogue.
His dialogue. Got it.
And so she and I were throwing lines back and forth the whole time leading up to me doing the track. And that line, and when he's talking about the laser blast being toward the tree, and he says, why isn't there anything on the ship? No damage. And so we were just throwing lines back and forth. So I always thought that she was she kind of wrote the Dooku lines and I was kind of doing the Mace response. But I'm going to throw it her way because I think, she's the future and I'm going to need somebody to take care of me when I get old. So when you hear this, Élan, you wrote that line. But I think it's different situations because I think as quickly as you would say that Dooku broke rules, he adhered to the rules of the Sith. So I think sometimes we break rules because we think that there are bigger rules to adhere to. I haven't met anyone who's just totally that totally disregards every rule, because that person would be a sight to behold. So I would say that there are times when I adhere to rules, and then there are times when I go, oh, let me see if this will break right here, and then keep it moving.
In this episode, the Dooku's desire to investigate Master Khattri's death kind of reminds me of Anakin in Attack of the Clones, telling Obi-Wan that investigation was implied in their mandate to protect Senator Amidala. Was that intentional?
No, but all of this stuff like lives in our heads, you know what I mean? So it's like you never know when you're picking up something. Like, I have friends who'll show me things, like show me movies that they're making or shorts or whatever, and I'll go, that comes from X, and they'll go, wait, what? And it's somewhere in their sense memory. So, I mean, I've watched the prequels and the sequels quite a few times, and I for me, it probably came from my roots as a TV cop writer, that there's always going to be the one person who goes, we can look at this case on the surface, or we can do a deeper dive into it. And it's kind of why I believe I ended up writing the Ahsoka episodes where she left, because if you think about it, there was the attacks, and then when she went to Barriss said, there's more going on, and Ahsoka started taking a deep dive into what was going on. I think that's very much my personality. If you tell me something is good here and I don't feel it in my instinct, then I'm going to start digging deeper and deeper. So I think that was very much a part of me.
Nice. Well, you said you directed as well. So did you get to work with the actors at all? Like Corey Burton, who does Count Dooku. Oh my gosh. And TC Carson.
And TC, yes. And TC, I've been a big fan of since Living Single. And so that was great. And I brought in Theo Rossi to play the senator, and also brought in a friend of mine, Terrell Tilford, to play the main soldier. So it was funny because when we first started, it was like, okay, we're going to keep an eye on this guy so he doesn't like fall off track with how he's making this. And then more and more, because Élan was on all of the Zoom calls with me through pre-production. She and Joel production designed that forest that they fight in.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful.
And she's an artist in her own right. So when they were designing Khatri, she was designing her own version of Khatri. And so the markings on Khatri's face comes from Élan. Oh. And so, we were such a pretty good tag team that they kind of kept saying, hey, just now that you've done X, do this. And so when it came time to deal with the actors, I thought, that's when Saul or Dave was going to jump in with us. They were like, no, go do it. You know how to direct people, go. And so that was, me and Élan on the separate occasions that we, because we didn't record with everyone together. We recorded them all individually. And so, they just kind of left that to us. In my mind, I consider Élan my co-director, because everything was talked out between us.
Wow. That's such an opportunity. And I've met Corey Burton before, and he looks just he's like a small person, and yet this giant voice comes out of him. Did that surprise you as well?
Yeah, no, not really, because even with actors, having been on I think I've been on 10, 12 TV shows. there's the personality, and then there's post action being yelled, and people become the character. What was really interesting was when they stay in the voice, but they're talking about regular things. Talking to TC, there were a couple of times when he was still in his Mace voice, and we were just talking about like him being in Chicago or something. So it was like Mace Windu in Chicago, you know. But no, I'm never surprised when an actor, actress, creative person kind of expands like a balloon, you know, and shows a different side to them, because that's kind of why we do this, you know. And he did it every way we asked, and then he nailed it on ways that he thought of that we hadn't thought of, and it was a really great experience just dealing with voices. The funny thing is, it kind of made me want to do a podcast, because I used to love radio shows when I was growing up. And, you know, we had moved away from it. And I was like, what other experience could be similar to directing actors in animation? And it was like, oh, I'll do a podcast.
Awesome.
Nice.
Just thinking about directing, you have these two characters, Mace Windu and Count Dooku, who are these amazing swordsmen in and of themselves. Was there any, like, how did you approach that scene when they were deflecting the blaster bolts and doing the choreography and whatnot?
I went to the master, Akira Kurosawa, and we talked about different samurai fights. And, you know, they've already got their own styles, as, you know, from the live action and from the animated stuff. And so we just talked about the larger attack, you know, and getting them surrounded and how that would look if they were surrounded, and not knowing that the droids were in the trees, and just what was the emotions that were going on, because the two of them are kind of arguing before the fight starts, and then they have to work together, and then they fall back on different sides. Because if you remember, you know, when Mace says, Dooku, stand down, they're coming at that from opposite ends. And the soldier, you know, kind of like gets the party started by shooting at him. And then it's like all of these soldiers are firing upon him. And then you've got fog in the forest, and then you've got droids in the trees. And so it's like the whole thing was, if we don't work together as quickly as possible, this might not go well. And I think it's I could be wrong, but I think it's one of the few times where you start off with a Jedi dying to lead you into the story. So you know it's dangerous territory.
Yep.
You know, and so we just kind of like looked at it from the attack and where they were emotionally, and then found some fights where people were being encroached upon, to kind of like be the inspiration to get that fight the way we got it.
Speaking of that emotion of the scene, you know, the music is really what brings out the emotion in these tales. And Kevin Kiner, yeah, he's amazing. And I mean, I love, actually, right before the attack comes, you have this beautiful forest scene, but you have this music that's almost a bit Jaws-like, in that it's making you very unsettled and uneasy. Was there any particular direction you gave Kevin Kiner for the music in this tale? Like any scene, really?
Yeah, it was do what you do, because you're really good at it. Yeah, the first time I met him, it was at a screening of, what was Darth Maul's brother's name?
Savage Opress.
Thank you. It was at a screening of those episodes, and Élan and I drove from LA to San Francisco to see him. And they introduced me to Kevin, and I was like, can I, do you have an album coming out? Is there something that I can buy because you're absolutely amazing? And he and his family, he's made it a family affair. And so, we had like general conversations, but I'm like, I'm not telling that dude, I'm not, hey, you know what this needs? It needs more cowbell. I'm not going to be that guy, especially when you're in the hands of somebody who is as intensely focused and brilliant as he is with what he does. So we kind of just talked about mood, and it was like, give us what you got, and he gave us what you hear.
Needs more cowbell. Needs more gong. No,
exactly. It needs more Tibetan horns.
Yes. Yeah. Did you ever talk with Kiner about like why he used the gong as kind of a heralding of each of these tales at all?
No. That was above my pay grade.
Okay.
That was him and Filoni, probably.
Okay.
Or yeah, no, I just stuck to my episode because I was like, I don't want to get this wrong. I don't want to come in like I know what I'm doing. Help,
Can we talk a little bit, just as a writer within the show, why Dooku and Ahsoka are good foils for these 6 episodes?
They were already handpicked when I got there. And like I read, some comments saying Tales of the Jedi. I thought it was going to be more Jedi. I was like, but they're Jedi. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the yin and the yang of this greater dynamic. And I think one of the things that stood out to me is both of them, and I was telling this to some writing students earlier. Everybody has an understanding of where someone's narrative starts, but that's not necessarily where the narrative starts. It starts before you get to know the people. And, if a person becomes successful, even if you hear the backstory, it colors how you see them from where you know them. And so I think with Dooku, especially, it was everybody has a presupposed notion about who he is. And so it was like, this is a good way to show someone's progression to the dark side that was different from Anakin's. Anakin's, I believe, comes from a naivete. And Dooku's comes more from maybe an inquisitiveness that is colored by his know-it-allness, right? If you think about him, there were times when it sort of reminded me of what I love about Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is neither good nor evil. He's both. But his genius might be what causes that rotation from one side to the other, because it never turns off, And so with Dooku, as represented through these 3 episodes, there's a constant thinking process that's going on that you can tell never shuts off. I think that scene with him in front of the tree in the Sith Lord and that conversation that he has with Yaddle is absolutely great, because you get to hear many emotions come out in that. There's you guys may not have done the right thing. I may not have done the right thing. This all may not be the right thing. And yet I got to let my apprentice go. And when she says, are you able to do that? And I think right before or after he says he's one with the Force, it's like there's a conclusion that kind of doesn't have anything to do with the arguments that he's presenting, but someone with that kind of brain is going to be thinking on all of those levels at once, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you think about the Ahsoka side, I think, man, that episode 5, practice makes perfect. And I texted Dave today. I was like, that ending was so great for that episode because we know her as the apprentice, but seeing her in her village and seeing this very simple human being become greater than what the narrative is that they all expect of her, simply because she stayed true to who she was in that village, was an amazing arc. So I think when you think about both of those arcs represent the greatest yin and yang possibilities within the Star Wars universe, with characters that we already know.
Yeah, you nailed it. We were here to just listen to that. That was amazing. I want to talk about the moment when he realizes that, well, Dooku realizes that Mace is now on the council, and
the
Dooku's
petty moment.
Yes, like, can we talk about that moment, because it's so. I just felt it. I actually felt for Dooku in that moment, and I'm usually like a.
No, it's because I think it's all of the subtleties. It's the moment where he looks up from as the casket's being lowered, and looks that they have across from each other. There's a sadness in his eyes. And then when he's looking out, I think in between the casket being lowered and him looking out on the Coruscant and that turn, he's made a heavy decision. Don't know what it is, but there's some decision that's been made in him that, and I don't even think at that particular time he had a handle on what the Sith were, but this thing that we're a part of may not have the value that we all think it has. And this guy who probably that I've known for a while, probably have had like friendly encounters with, is now falling into this system that I question. But even in questioning it, there's still a little bit of, why you? ... sucker.
Yeah.
No, I also think that when he says, we followed the rules and you kind of chose not to, that's a judgment call.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't followed those rules, who knows how insidious that senator would have become? Who knows what he would have been able to do that we wouldn't have. All of the things that the Sith, if you think about it, all of the things that he was guarding against by investigating that death, the Sith end up doing. Right? They infiltrate the Senate. They dig deep. They get so deep that the clones come into existence. That, and so because he was on guard in that episode, and his biggest reward was watching Mace become a council member, we all can't. If you think about it, what turns Anakin into Vader, it's his emotions, and so I think in that moment, it was an emotional moment for him. Like, I did the right thing. You followed the rules. Had we followed the rules, we wouldn't have been able to come to this conclusion, and you get rewarded. So when you talk about voices, it was Corey's decision to say Master Jedi as kind of an insult. And I was over the moon when when he did it, because it was like, in that moment, in those two words, I ain't got much respect for you.
Yeah.
You know, and eventually he doesn't have respect for the Jedi.
Yeah. So at the end, Dooku is speaking with the guard in jail at the end. So it sounds like, well, do you think, was it under your impression that Dooku was already under the influence of Darth Sidious at this point in his journey? Like he has access to...
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
Yeah. I don't think so. I think that when he's talking to the guard, he's saying, you didn't go about it the right way, but your intent was correct. And and the one thing I've learned about smart people, like super smart people, is that they have blind sides as well. And I think that everything that he was espousing wasn't because he was under Sidious's umbrella, but it's what made Sidious go, here's somebody I can grab. And so that's kind of my perspective on it.
I love it. Just he's open to Sidious beginning then to influence his choices after this episode about choices.
Yeah, throughout history, we've seen people who've ended up on different sides of things. And when you sit down and talk to them, or if they come back to their right mind, and who knows what that is, but if they kind of come back to a point where they go, yeah, that was kind of nutty, and you ask them about it, the answer usually kind of like winds down to, because of all of the personal things that I was going through, I was a little bit open to that.
That makes sense.
There's no way, if Sidious had come to him and said, hey, so here's what's really going to happen. So I'm going to ask you to be my apprentice, and I'm going to have you do some stuff. And you're going to you might have to mess up some people that you're really cool with, but it's for a greater cause. But then somewhere down the line, because there can only be two people, and that's master and apprentice, someone better is going to come along, and I might have to chop your head off. Sign here. I'm going to say that Dooku would say, and who are you again? Oh, and by the way, I'm going to overthrow the Senate because I'm really going to be the bad guy, but we're going to make everybody turn against the Jedi. What do you think about that there, old Dooku? So I think a lot of times where we kind of fail ourselves as humanity is that we're not honest enough to say, in our smartest moment, we're still ignorant. We like to really lean into how smart we are. And a master manipulator can say, you're too smart by your own good. And that's where I can get you.
So then in choices, all of these tales have like this one lesson, this message. What is the main message or lesson you wanted people to take away from choices?
That my daughter's a fantastic writer. No. Because I made the right choice. For us, the conversations that I had with my my daughter is, if you think about, educating her about why George made Star Wars in the first place, that a lot of it was about Vietnam. A lot of it was about, the World War II Nazi regime and those kind of things, is that you can make a bold statement within a simple thing. And so when the soldier says the Jedi are lapdogs and they'll do anything that the Senate tells them, you know, the Jedi kind of moves past that, even though they're on opposite sides. And it's just like every inch of perspective can change an entire narrative. So they go to retrieve this body because their focus is on retrieving this body, because their focus is different about retrieving this body, this Jedi. Mace has his perspective, Dooku has his perspective. Because they're so engrossed in each other's perspective, the soldier's perspective is revelatory. And then when they get back and fall back into the fold or the system as it's been designed, they go back to personal things, not knowing that greater things are coming. And I'm saying all that to say that in our lives, you know, there's a statement about people being ever vigilant, but people don't talk about how tiring that is to be ever vigilant. But it does mean that you have to kind of keep your mind and your ears open to understand that shifts can happen. And you don't want to be behind a shift. You at the least you want to be alongside of it, because if you fall behind it, it could be aimed at you. You won't know until it's too late. If you're alongside of it, you can go, all right, I need to get away from this mess. And so everyone, Dooku included, were so caught up in their own perspective that even he couldn't see the grander thing. You know, so I think what I was trying to say in all of that is pay more attention to your surroundings. Be more in control of your choices, and know that they don't just affect you when you're making them for yourself. If he hadn't fallen into, you know, that moment when the standoff between he and Yaddle, in that moment, again, because he was looking at it from his perspective, if he had been able to flash forward to being on that ship between those two swords, would he have made that choice?
Right.
You know, and we can't foretell the future, but the future happens in increments. Every time we make a choice, we are determining a future.
It's such an important thing in Star Wars. You just think about every choice you make, it could have such a big ramification. That's kind of why space operas work, because they make everything grander in the stakes.
They make them grand, they make it exquisite, but they're always about the most personal of choices.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share about this episode? Because we've had you for a while here, and we don't want to take up too much of your precious time, but is there anything else you wanted to tell people about this episode? That
I loved the experience. I've always loved working with Filoni, Carrie. Athena became a good friend to my daughter. And what I have learned from working at Lucasfilm and working with the people that I've worked with, it's been such a beautiful experience that it colors how I've run shows. It colors how I've worked with people. And if there's anything about this episode, it was that I was able to give my child an understanding of what a good work environment can be. And that made it absolutely wonderful. That's so important. The lifting up of and sharing experiences. And
particularly a positive experience, because a lot of people talk about negative experiences in writers' rooms or in that craft.
And they exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that
And I've been a part of them to the degree that after my first season of Clone Wars, I came back like I was John the Baptist. Like I was like, it can be done. You know, we don't have to deal with this hoot nanny. And then the 2 years following that I went, they proved that the first year wasn't a fluke, but it was definitely a fish stinks from the head sort of thing. And and working with, like I tell Carrie all the time, I'd work with them in a minute at the drop of a hat. And the fact that I got to introduce that perspective and environment to someone who's super important to me makes that episode all that more valuable.
So you talk about all these Zoom meetings. Did you ever get to take her to Skywalker Ranch?
No, but they've been to the Presidio.
They've been to the main offices.
I'm sure she'll make it.
Some point, have to.
Yeah.
But here's a funny thing, though. When she was 13, Dave said, bring her up for a week. And, this was when they were at Big Sky, right? Yeah.
Big Rock Ranch?
Big Rock, thank you. And I was like, Élan, you want to go, watch the Clone Wars episodes get animated, kind of stay up there for a week and like be a part of the process. And she was like, nah, I'm good. I mean, that's a whole week. And I went, oh, your little small perspective is so cute. And then when she turned 16, we were driving somewhere and she goes, I think I made a big mistake not going up there, right? And I said, well, I'm glad you figured it out. And who knew that within a year she was going to get that experience? And what I saw in her as a professional at 17, I was like, she'll if there's a chance to get up to that joint, she'll get up there.
One of those special places for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Is there anything else, Charles, that you'd like to plug, that people of your work that is out there that people should know about?
Currently show running season 2 of an Amazon show called Outer Range.
Oh, yes. I have that in my to watch list.
With Josh Brolin, who's absolutely adorable and wonderful. And, I'm trying to figure out what else to do before I retire.
Nice. Well, where can our listeners, our Yob Cubs, find you on social media? This has been such a joy. And I know you like to talk because you and Tricia talk a lot on Twitter.
We message a lot. I mean, Twitter, at Chief Rocka 77, and on Instagram, it's Charles Murray Film TV _ Film TV. I don't know. I don't get these things right. If you type in my name, it'll come up.
We'll put it in the show notes for you so that people can find it. And we so appreciate this. This was like one of the best interviews. I mean, when you started talking about your daughter and all that, I mean, I think it just opened our hearts, and I think people are going to really find this insightful. And this little short episodes, but you can have an hour-long conversation about them. How cool is that?
I think I watched the run this morning, and we all look for stuff that we can be proud of in the long run. And I'm proud of my run with this. And I owe it all to my dear friend Cameron Litvack, who put in that initial call to get me out there. And, to know that. Oh, there is one thing about that episode. At the funeral, when Mace is standing across from Dooku at the casket, those two female Jedis standing next to him are my kids.
Oh, that's so cool.
Nice.
I was wondering if there was a little special something there. That's so cool.
You know, and a lot of it comes back to how this conversation started, representation. So somebody out there 6 years old or older who's going to look at Mace and see them standing next to him, they have a reaction. And so we were able to contribute that.
Nice.
And maybe the next convention, there'll be somebody cosplaying those characters.
Yeah.
So exciting.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yep.
Okay, Sarah, like that was right up there in one of my top favorite interviews. And we've interviewed a lot of amazing people in Star Wars animation. I mean, it's a little story and there was so much to talk about in that little story, how much thought they have to put into it. And I just want to talk, because we talked about a specific episode. I want to talk about Tales of Jedi. But just for us, like, because there's Dooku and there's Ahsoka. And at first I was going to say, let's pick our favorite, but I don't think we could just pick one, right? It wouldn't be fair. So if you had to pick your favorite Dooku episode, what would it be?
I see your notes here, and my notes are kind of indicative of your notes. So you had picked one that I initially thought of, which is the Sith Lord, because you can do a whole podcast episode on just this one story. What did you call it? Meaty morsel?
Meaty morsel.
On this meaty morsel. Yes. You could do a whole episode. However, I'm going to change my answer since you already picked that. And I'm going to say I love the Sith Lord for the music, because the music was the best. It has so many callbacks to the Phantom Menace and the prequels, and it was amazing. However, I really enjoyed Justice, which is the first Dooku episode where he visits a planet, and the senator's son is kidnapped, right? And I really thought, like, this is the first time we really got to explore Dooku in this way, right? You got to kind of get into his mindset, and you understood why later on he turns to the dark side just by watching this one episode. So I thought that one was really cool. And the fact that we had a young Qui-Gon Jinn as well. They're both so young, right? They're both young. There's a force choke. There's dogs in Star Wars. I mean, that was interesting. And I really love that. I think I like it because that's the first time we got so in-depth into Dooku, and I never understood him before this episode. Yeah.
You know, I really like the Sith Lord for Yaddle. It's hard to like get away from that. And this Choices episode was amazing too. I struggled to pick, but because of the Yaddle part, I've loved that character. Sometimes she's been the butt of jokes, and they just gave her story just so much gravitas. And when I was writing the visual encyclopedia and Ultimate Star Wars, I remember I had to write about the Jedi Council, and, you know, she was on the council for Phantom Menace, and then she wasn't there. So that's always been this like burning question in my mind. What happened to Yaddle? And now we know that she had left the council, and that I think she did the best she could to stay true to being a Jedi and trying to give Dooku the chance to do the right thing. And maybe, you know, not realizing that there's just no bringing him back, but she really wanted to believe in him, that he could make a different decision. And so it was just so powerful. And I guess let's talk about the fact now that it's Bryce Dallas Howard.
Her voice. Yes.
So apparently
cool.
Yoda is the only person that speaks in his little syntax.
Cadence, yes. There you go. Yeah, she doesn't speak that way. No, she speaks like a little old lady who is talking to you just like this. Now I'm slipping into an English accent for some reason. I'm not sure why.
But it's so perfect. Bryce's just kind of has that like warm maternal presence anyway, and but she's so knowledgeable and well thought out. It just made perfect sense that she would do this part. And so for me, just to see Yaddle and see what happened, I know, it's hard because now we know for sure that she's gone. I mean, there's the implication you don't see her anywhere else, and obviously Order 66 has a big impact on everything, but you see like the choices she made and what she was trying to do the right thing, that it was in that moment with the picking back up the when you thought she squashed and and then
the Force theme, she opens the door, you're like, oh, I hope we don't see any broken bones, because girlfriend.
But I am going to say, I feel like this is one of my things as a Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebel fan and the Bad Batch and all its animation. It's generally the episode I'm watching, so I'll take any of them. Yeah.
Well, can we just talk about the fact that Yaddle sensed this darkness in the Jedi Council well before any of the other Jedi, and how, had she lived, or had she been able to bring a comlink with her as she was following Dooku, or, like warn someone, things might have gone a different direction for the entire galaxy because of Yaddle. Like, how amazing is this one Jedi?
It's so just the way it's laid out is, I think all these people that were influential, the Jedi Master in the Choices episode, who's lost her life as well, if these people had survived, would have things been different? I don't know, but I think about that there's just so much more. We're just getting kind of an enrichment of that era, even though we feel like it's like so grand, the things that we've gotten anyway, which leads us to talk about Ahsoka. And I think it's going to be hard to pick a favorite again here, but is there one that just kind of was impactful to you?
So yes, actually, this one was a little easier for me. I really loved Life and Death, which is the very first one. It's Ahsoka as a baby. And partly I love it because we did see it at Celebration. We had an early access screening. We all got to see it together. You all heard the entire room go, oh, when you see little baby Ahsoka turn to the camera, right? And you hear Ahsoka's theme. It's like, oh my God. So I love it. And I love it for the fact that I feel like this particular lesson, it carries over to all the other episodes. Value life, honor life, don't be afraid of death, face death. And particularly in the Ahsoka episodes. So if you go to Resolve, in which that's the final one where you see Padme's funeral and Ahsoka decides to rejoin, the fight. There are a ton of moon shots in this episode. Everything, you're panning down from the moon, you're panning up to that other planet moon, like all of this. And I feel like what that's saying is, even though you have life, even though you die, nature and the galaxy still goes on. Like it's part of life, death, and it's all part of life. You may think I don't know if you can say that a little better, but
the important thing within what I think Dave Filoni's trying to zero in on is Anakin was afraid of death, right? He was afraid of losing his mother, and in Ahsoka from a child was taught that death isn't something necessarily to fear, that there's a cycle and that you will eventually die, but that doesn't, and the way we deal with death frames our lives in enormous ways. It's the way people are drawn to religion, or the way they'll exercise,
or go away from religion, or
exactly. So there's all these ways that death influences choices we make. And for Anakin, that's just like the whole thing, is he's afraid that, you know, if something happens to Padme, it's the fear of her death, and obviously the pain that he suffered after his mother's death, and all these other deaths that he sees around him. You know, we see during the Clone Wars over and over and over again, people that he fought beside that he loses, and he struggles with it. But you can see maybe that there's just a little bit in the nurture there that helped Ahsoka make a different choice. I mean, it's always nature and nurture, and you could still make a different choice given all those things, but you could see how that would help you and inform who you are as a person, to be shown death so early and to not fear it.
Okay, yeah. So then life and death, this episode carries over in Practice Makes Perfect, to the tune of, like, Anakin actually says those words. This is about life and death. You know, Ahsoka's asking, why are you making me do this? Why are you making clones, you know, do this? And he's like, this is about life and death. As your master, I'm responsible for you. And the best way I can protect you is to teach you how to protect yourself. That is the message of that one. And I think it's amazing. And I just love how life and death carries through. So that's my favorite. It was clear for me.
It becomes, if you know, we've had this just talked about it, that he's afraid of death. His fear of death actually does help Ahsoka. So there's the yin and the yang, and I think that's always happening. There's this cycle of learning and life and mentoring. So that's always been the message, that Ahsoka is who she is and makes the choices she does, and is true to being a Jedi in a lot of ways from the things she's learned from Anakin. And I think also by way of Obi-Wan Kenobi, she's in his orbit a lot. And also from what she's learned from Padme, there's these important voices in her existence. And I think it's important that we see her there at Padme's funeral, honoring her friend as well. I mean, it's kind of like, that's like, oh,
that made me so sad, just knowing, like, they're friends, right? They were girlfriends.
They were. And I had in preparation for doing this interview with Charles, I had rewatched his episodes. You know, we forget that Padme came in the trial, and she spoke on her behalf. She was her
that's right,
like, it's not an attorney, but you know, she represented her in this, like, I mean, she was gonna get killed. I think, you know, she was gonna get the death penalty if this didn't go well, because she's a traitor in what they were gonna rule. And obviously Anakin goes and finds out what the truth and helps save Ahsoka, but it's a little too late for Ahsoka.
Damage is done. Yeah. Wow.
For sure. And you could talk for hours, I think, about the parallels between the realizations that Dooku is making in these little tales, and then the realizations that Ahsoka makes in those episodes of the Clone Wars in season 5, when she does step away.
So what for you was your favorite Ahsoka episode?
Practice Makes Perfect, for sure. Yeah. We get to see, it was like going back to the memories, but then it tied it all together all the way to the end of season 7, and those big moments where she rises above everything. So, you know, she learns the moves that save her life from the clones, and we see that, you know, Rex was in there, and if, you know, even the fact that if Rex hadn't fought it in the moment, that he probably could have dropped her, because he knew her moves too. So, you know, there's a lot there to the choices that, you know, Rex is overcoming something that's like in his head, that he's fighting something that he shouldn't be able to fight. So there's a lot going on in those episodes, and this sort of just layers into it beautifully.
Wow. Amazing. All right. Well, do we want to just talk? I put this last little thing in here. Did you have time to think? What is your favorite musical moment out of any of these?
The whole thing?
Okay.
I mean, Charles said it. Kyner's kind of a god, and we haven't heard his Star Wars stuff recently, and to go back to it, and Music's just so important to what's happening in Star Wars. It's telling you mood and intention. It adds the extra layer. And there was a couple of different things that, you know, I just shut my eyes a couple times and replayed it. And we talk about that in our last episode. Listen to you know, people will absorb them and they're done. Like, go back and just like listen to the things they do and the way they use music and different instruments. And I feel like I need to do that more because it just came out today, and I will for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say I love the fact that each of these tales is heralded by this gong sound, and they also end with that sound. And it makes me think of like being in a little village and you hear that gong and you know, okay, now I have to gather for story time.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
That's what I
story
love.
Hour will commence now.
Yes, it's instinctual. And so I'm going to roll this into a plug because I did some research on the gong in Asian culture, which Star Wars is built a lot on Asian culture. And so I talk about that, and I do a musical analysis of all 6 of these in the latest episode of Skywalking Through Neverland. Along with Richard, we talk about each episode very much in depth. It's almost a 2-hour podcast because there's so much in these. And so that just came out today, and it came out a little late because I had talked about all this music, but if you don't roll it in, it's just so hard to have a podcast episode. So I was like searching, trying to find little clips that people had put on YouTube. And then like after I had searched for 2 hours, all of a sudden Kevin Kiner, the soundtrack came up on YouTube. I'm like, yes. And so I like downloaded it all and put it all in. And it took me like half the morning, but now it's there. And please listen because it's a superb episode. I'm very proud of it. So yeah. Episode 394 of Skywalking Through Neverland.
People don't realize like how much work it is when you start layering in music and all that other stuff. We edit our episodes as well, just for, you know, make sure it's smooth and it sounds good. But then you start adding in music and you got to make sure it all works, and it can become quite an effort and a process to find the right clip, right? Because you need to find the piece, and you don't want to be too long, and you want to make the point. So there's a lot there to it.
Yes. Is there anything you wanted to plug, Tricia?
Well, there will be hyperspace series coming out specifically about Andor,
oh, nice. When is that coming? Because I'm waiting.
Well, you know, there's a lot going on in Star Wars. I'm not complaining. Embarrassment of riches. And we have our Women of Andor episode out. If you guys have not checked that out, that was so amazing for you and I just to talk about all these female characters. And this was right in advance of episode 8 dropping of Andor today. And there was even more things that we could have talked about that were amazing and things happening. And
I think we'll have to do like an extra, like at the end, right? We'll do another.
Oh, for sure.
Women.
But
yeah.
We got to see the beginning of the evil twin flames.
Yes.
So we have to talk about that ultimately. So, you know, it's all coming, you guys. And we're going to ask if you guys enjoyed this episode, please share it with people, because I think the story of Charles' story for his daughter and himself with Star Wars is so amazing that people should hear that. And just to hear how much work went into just an episode. I mean, this not like they don't take it lightly. Everything's a choice within the storytelling that they made. And to choose to be a storyteller is to choose to be vulnerable and to expose yourself as a person and, you know, your feelings. So I think that's such a powerful thing to have a conversation and share it with the audience.
Absolutely.
And for people, for our Zoom discussions, we are putting out questions. There's one on our Facebook group right now to ask when people would like to have them. And we will be releasing at some point this is when we're going to talk about Tales of the Jedi and Andor, but we're waiting for some feedback. You guys go in there and let us know when you'd like to talk about this stuff, to what times, what time of day, what day of the week, and where your flexibility is. So we want to hear from you. So go there, answer the question.
All right. Wow. Well, to keep the conversation going, you can visit us over at fangirlsgoingrogue.com. You can also find us on Twitter or Instagram. We are at FG Going Rogue. Tricia is at Fangirl Cantina, and I am at Jedi Tink.
And I want to thank everybody who answered our questions this week about Tales of the Jedi and Andor and what are you watching. So thanks for engaging with us. You can send us an email, contact@fangirlsgoingrogue.com, and say this is what we'd like you to talk about.
Very true. And on Facebook, we are Fangirls Going Rogue. So you can search that and find our group and like our page and answer the questions that pop up for our group. And you can join us there.
And please go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a positive 5-star review. We need your reviews so more people can find us.
So until next time, what choice are you going to make, Tricia? Da 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 da. Yub.
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 Yub. Hey,
I don't know.
synchronization. I like it.
Yay. Awesome. Amazing.
Oh my God. I was like starting to cry when he was talking about his daughter.
I
like,
know.
Don't be a flub bub, Trish.
He answered that last question first.
I know.
That
That's
was
the joy
perfect.
of having notes and being ready to change it on the fly.
Uh-huh.